Hello and welcome, everybody. We have ourselves another episode of the Case Specific podcast, and I am joined here today with another case specific dietitian. Hi, Danielle.
Hey,
Welcome, welcome. What do you think of the space?
it's pretty legit. It's a little bit scary, but in a good way.
You'll settle in, you'll get comfy. This has become my home away from home. See how calm
Fair.
Remy is?
Way
She's
calmer than me.
snorking. Exactly. And she's way more angsty than you are. So you'll be good. But welcome everybody. Danielle is with me. Danielle is one of our mentoring dietitians at Case Specific. She's been with me for over 5 years,
Yeah.
which is wild. Case Specific has grown a lot during her tenure and thanks to her tenure. So that's a pretty cool thing. Danielle specializes in the eating disorder space. So Danielle is our eating disorder specialist here at Case, and she's our eating disorder mentoring RD. So all of our dietitians learn and study with her and under her so that we can help the eating disorder and disordered eating population. So today's episode is going to come from that disordered eating angle, which I think all the listeners are going to actually find really interesting because I think disordered eating is a phrase that a lot of people don't even know what it means. Eating disorder is something that's more commonly known, but they tend to think anorexia, bulimia, really extreme. And we're going to be digging into all aspects of disordered eating and coming at it from a lot of different lenses. So I think this is going to make for some good TV for family and people and individuals. So I anticipate this one being a very well listened to episode. So thank you for joining me.
Yeah, of course. I hope. It's obviously something I feel really passionate about, so it's exciting for me. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are just going to just dive on in if you're cool with that.
Cool. Let's do
So,
it.
as all of you know, for typical listeners, we have our typical episode segments. So we're going to do 6 segments like we normally do. We are going to kick it off with a commonly asked question.
Okay.
And again, this is for you to answer. So I'm going to do my darndest to not be overly talkative. You know how hard that is for me, but we're going to try. So we have our commonly asked question. I'm going to cue it up for us to start this conversation, which is, what is the difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating?
Yeah, that is a really, really good question. I like to think about really most things like fall on a spectrum, right? So a little bit of everything falls on a spectrum for something. Not everything is the most red, not everything is the most yellow, right? There's like a spectrum of everything. That's the same for eating disorders and disordered eating. So oftentimes I think about that whole spectrum like on a color wheel, so to speak, right? And eating disorders fall all the way to the left or all the way to the right, doesn't really matter which, in like the dark red. And eating disorders kind of are defined by the DSM-5. And that is a really specific, there's like a specific box of criteria and guidelines that somebody would have to click or match their behaviors to in order to get that diagnosis. But the disordered eating spectrum kind of is a little bit more encompassing than that. So even if somebody doesn't fall or fit within the exact square of the DSM-5, but somebody's still impacted by their relationship with food, that would be considered somewhere on that spectrum of disordered eating. And people kind of fall in and out of different behaviors at different periods of their life, but it is really like all encompassing, so to speak. It doesn't necessarily mean somebody's qualifying for an eating disorder diagnosis according to the DSM-5, but if somebody's relationship with food is impaired, or if their relationship with food or behaviors with food are impactful of their quality of life, that's enough of a problem being a strong word, to say that somebody fits somewhere on the disordered eating spectrum.
Beautiful. Can you give some examples of behaviors or what we'll call maybe sub-diagnoses that exist on the spectrum? Because like you
Sure.
said, I think we can hear where disordered eating versus eating disorder tends to be those most extreme. So your anorexia and your bulimia, and those are obviously they're at a level of eating disorder that's a level of danger. That's why it's so diagnostic and objective.
Right.
A lot of these other ones, they may kind of fall under the radar a little bit because they may not be as objectively measured, but they're still, to your point, very damaging and harmful to the person's quality of life.
Right, exactly. So the first thing I think of is honestly the OSFED category, which still falls within the DSM-5, but it's kind of the catch-all for anything that's not the bulimia, the binge eating disorder, or the anorexia. But if I think about behaviors as a whole, like somebody, intentionally making a choice to skip breakfast, somebody intentionally making a choice to only eat a salad for lunch, somebody intentionally making a choice to not fuel before their workout, Somebody making a choice to overwork out or over exercise, overtrain, a lot of that's viewed as like discipline. A lot of that is
Mm,
viewed as like, ooh, what a good thing. But if that person is having a lot of anxiety around that thing, or if they miss a workout, or if they're, for whatever reason, the power goes out and their salad is bad because the fridge, doesn't have enough power and they need to do some backup thing and they need a PB&J for lunch, right? Like that has happened, I'm sure
yeah.
that's happened to
It's a
me and
very
my power
human
goes out.
experience. Yeah.
Exactly. What do they do? And if the anxiety goes up, and if somebody can't handle that experience flexibly, that's an issue. So that would be kind of some examples of behaviors. And again, it kind of comes back to impact on quality of life.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it's things happen, right? Things happening at random or being more flexible. Or if you get stuck in traffic and you're like, holy crap, like I missed my afternoon snack because I got stuck in traffic, or my dinner got delayed because I got stuck in traffic. Those are really human experiences. If those human experience elicit some kind of emotional response, that is more of a red flag, or a behavior. Or if somebody says, well, I'm going to take the long way home so I can avoid the appetizer that gets ordered at the dinner table and only eat the entree, that is kind of an issue, right? So
Yeah.
anything that we don't engage with neutrally, I think qualifies as a behavior.
Yeah, that's well said. What are some of the diagnoses that fall along that spectrum, just so people can kind of hear some of those, like the orthorexias, ARFIDs, those kind of things?
Right. Well, you named two, right? So I think the three most common people hear about are the anorexia nervosa, the binge eating disorder, and the bulimia. Some of the other ones are ARFID, or avoidant restrictive feeding intake disorder, which is a mouthful of things to say at the same time. And there's a couple of different avenues that can fall under. There is the orthorexia, so somebody who really sticks to the clean eating, so to speak. Over exercise isn't really something that is I guess, like key term, so to speak, but that definitely falls on the spectrum of
Hmm.
disordered eating. Night eating syndrome is another one. So people sometimes get that mixed up with binge eating. But if somebody is going to bed, waking up in the middle of the night, then going to eat something and going back to bed, if that's not coming from a true hunger perspective, which sidebar, if that's coming from a true hunger perspective, you are not eating enough food during the
Yeah,
day.
completely different conversation and intervention
Exactly.
at that point. Yep.
Exactly. But if that's not a hunger related issue, that would be considered night eating syndrome, which is again falling on the disordered eating spectrum.
And it's worth saying that night eating and binge eating can happen concurrently.
They
They're
can, but
not the
they're not
same
the
thing.
same.
That's what I mean.
Exactly.
It's like you can be a night eater and not be binging, and you can also be a night eater that is binging. And those are two
Correct.
diagnoses. So it's good. It's good. I'm happy you parsed that apart for people. Let's explain ARFID a little bit, because I think that's one of them that unfortunately really flies under the radar in terms of it seems like it's so understandable and justifiable. But again, what we're going to be digging into that I'm hoping our listeners can understand is a lot of these behaviors, depending on where they're coming from, could be acceptable behaviors, but where they're coming from is what causes them to become a negative, and then also what oftentimes is what makes them pathological and compounding, and it's what makes them worse and worse. And so RFID is one of the ones that I think a lot of people that have it, they just fundamentally don't realize that it's a problem, because I'll call it the excuse is one of the most logical excuses. And so I'd love to cue you up on that, but dig into RFID a little bit for us.
Sure. So ARFID, really deemed as, if you think about like picky eating, that is and even I think that's what you're alluding to in regards to the excuse, right? It's somebody who has really, really picky eating tendencies. And there's a difference between somebody who has picky eating and somebody who has really strong preferences in regards to food, and somebody who has so picky eating that it creates this realm. Again, I'm going to use the word anxiety, but this
Yeah.
emotional response to being presented with food that doesn't feel safe for them. It's pretty significant. Oftentimes, and hopefully, we figure that out when kiddos are kiddos, and
Mm.
less so into adulthood. But at least in my time as a eating disorder focused professional, I've seen people in many different age groups, like finding out for the first time, oh, I didn't know what this was.
Yeah.
ARFID's really interesting. It can kind of come to or be led to it, whatever you want to say, from three different avenues. There's like a fear of adverse outcome. So let's say somebody when they were younger had some kind of choking incident in regards to a certain food, and then all of a sudden, it's not really a sudden, but all of a sudden they're not going to eat that food again, or if they're presented with that food, or even if they see that food, there's this massive kind of emotional reaction because that was a really scary experience for
Yeah.
them. Um, Texture and temperature is another one for people. So people who have really strong preferences on specific textures, or if something has to be crunchy, but it can only be crunchy in this way and it can't be crunchy in that way, that would be another avenue for ARFID. So it really is dependent on where it's coming from. A lot of times in the world of ARFID, I see super tasters. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but
Yep.
super tasters are really interesting. Those individuals have way stronger taste buds than I do for sure, and they can literally taste the brand differences from different
From
foods,
different foods.
which is nuts. So like
Yeah.
parent will say, all right, well, we're having mac and cheese, and put Kraft mac and cheese down on the table. And they're like, absolutely not. That's not Velveeta. I'm not
They
eating
can tell
that.
the
They
difference.
can tell the difference, even in potato chips. Like,
Did they at Pitt? So Danielle also graduated from Pitt. Did you guys do the litmus test in the food science lab where you had to take one of the little litmus strips and put it on your tongue to see if you were a super taster?
I don't remember doing that.
Okay. We're
I don't
like
think I did
5
that.
years apart in graduation, so I might be dating myself. But
I don't remember doing that at
so when
all.
I was at Pitt in the food science lab, this was undergrad, so it might have been like senior year. And so for
Gotcha.
me, that would have been 2011 or 2012. And then for you, it was probably like 6 years later or something, because, you youngins out here making the way of things. But it was so funny because the whole point is those little litmus strips, and a litmus strip is a pH strip. So a lot of people can remember from science class in middle school or high school, you dip it in a liquid and it'll turn a color that will tell you whether it's acidic or basic. Well, if you put one of those on your tongue and you are a super taster, it tastes insanely acidic. And if you put it on your tongue and you are not a super taster, it tastes soapy and basic. And everyone put the litmus strip on their tongue, and I started spazzing out because I had the most acidic taste in my mouth that made me gag like uncontrollably. And I started spitting, and I was like, oh my God, what? And they didn't prime us for like what it was. It was meant to be like a double blinded test. And our teacher goes, Andrew, you're the first super taster I've ever met. And I was just like, well, this was a dumb way to find out.
Right.
But
Gee, thanks for explaining that.
yeah, so not only am I aware of it, I'm actually a super taster, and I have had that my entire life. I can taste the differences in foods. I can taste the ingredients in blends of things. They made us do this really cool thing afterwards where they made snow cones and they made them different colors. So the purple one was lemon and the green one was berry. And so it was basically like the association of people associate what they see is what they taste. And super tasters are unimpacted by sight versus taste. I was the only person that was able to actually guess every flavor. And it's because to me, the like it being purple didn't change the fact that it was lemon. And so there's an association there. But super tasting is interesting because like a lot of kids are. And so vegetables are going to taste super bitter to them. And like you said, these become really strong preferences that if we don't understand, can create somewhat traumatic experiences in food aversions, right? Like forcing a child that's a super taster to eat something that tastes terrible. You think they're just being stubborn or trying to assert their independence, but they actually are having a legitimate experience. And then as they get older, they start to resent and think vegetable bad. And now all of a sudden they avoid certain things because of that experience. And so it really is one of those interesting. I'm happy you brought that one up because that is one of the feels less common, but it's actually more common than you think. And it's really highly correlated with high functioning and autism.
Mm-hmm.
And I will note what's really interesting is you've known me a long time. When I was in my like hyper anxious, overworked phase of life, my taste buds were hypersensitive.
Ooh,
So,
interesting
and
correlation.
what's interesting is in the last, 4 years or so, as I've calmed down and relaxed and really changed my energy, I taste food completely differently. For years, I would gag when I drank beer. So I just didn't drink beer in my 20s because a taste of it, the hops flavor was so overpowering to me. And now I can enjoy a beer with absolutely no problem whatsoever. Whiskey tasted like blue cheese to me. It was so overwhelming. It was like literally taking a bite of like gorgonzola or blue cheese. I could taste the mold that was used to make to make the whiskey.
Wow.
And now I can sip a whiskey on ice and enjoy the flavor. It's over and over. It's to say my taste buds have actually changed because I'm less stimmed. But it is to note that that's another piece of it is if you have like a high functioning kiddo or an autistic kiddo or somebody that's wired a bit spicy, is what I'll say. That wiring can amplify their tongue and their taste, and as a result, can completely change their palate. And I'm now in my 30s learning the new taste of food because a lot of foods taste very differently to me than they did 5 years ago.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. I've
Yeah.
had to explore foods again. And I say this just because from an ARFID perspective, I never had what you would consider a clinically diagnosed ARFID, but I had extremely strong preferences that were rooted in subconscious. I didn't know why I
Mhm.
felt that way, but now as I like am on the other side of it, I go, "Oh, this tasted really strong to me," or "This was really overwhelming," or the smell of this food was too fragrant for me." There were things that were off-putting, and so a lot of
Mm.
the foods I tended to avoid or not eat were rooted in my interaction and experience with them. But that interaction and experience can change, which is kind of
Mhm.
a neat thing. If you understand what's actually going on, you can hear where, man, we're complicated creatures.
True statement. True statement. I think, humans are really interesting, brains are really interesting, psychology is interesting. So, true.
Yeah. With association, the thing I like that you said I wanted to emphasize, or with ARFID, I should say, I like the concept that it is the association that becomes such an important thing. And I know you and I, when we've troubleshot cases together or, worked with our team, a lot of times the way we look at ARFID is trying to understand the association,
Mhm.
which is so how did this negative association develop? And the thing I'd want to share and have you give feedback on is some of the more common sort of associations that happen. I know I've seen environmental associations where, a kid will have a bad experience related to a food in a place. And then instead of blaming the place, blames the food and then starts to avoid that food. I personally did that as a child. My parents would go whenever we went to Ohio to see my grandparents, and I'm an only grandchild on that side. We would go to the same restaurant whenever we'd leave. And I associated that restaurant with leaving. And that restaurant was notorious for fried chicken. It was a like fried chicken restaurant. And I did not eat fried chicken until I was in my 20s because I just, oh, I don't like fried chicken. And it was like, no, I didn't like leaving my grandparents as a 6 year old, like stuff like that. And so the association of the environment matters, but then it can also be like really traumatic experience, like having some sort of traumatic digestive or illness. Or I've seen kids where they throw up in school because of something completely unrelated to what they ate. They actually were getting sick and had a virus or something along those
Right.
lines, and then they blame the food. And so I said more than I wanted to there, but it's to say, any thoughts on some of the more interesting associations you've seen, or any practical frameworks for kind of excavating that you'd want to share?
Yeah, two things come to mind. The one that comes to mind is kind of exactly what you were saying. I had a kiddo. She was 11, I want to say, and she had some kind of pizza or some. There was some kind of pizza night she was having with her family, and that weekend she just so happened to get the flu and got very, very, very sick.
Mm,
And since then, like, just was not able to eat any kind of dairy food at all. And then that grew. Like, dairy food grew to, well, what if I'm full? Maybe I got sick because I was full, so I'm not going to get full anymore. Or maybe I should just not eat before bed because she got sick in the middle of the night. So then from literally having pizza night with her family to all of a sudden no dairy, not getting full, not eating before bed, it just kind of grew into this really mass
yeah.
experience for her. And I remember back that it was a couple years ago now, but back then we actually had to. She was so scared to eat. She had to go to Children's Hospital not once but twice for an extended period of time, not just a weekend to get her heart rate
Hmm.
back up and elevated, but she really had to be in Children's two times for a small period of time to get to a place where she was safe enough to do some of the challenges at home. And that was really tough. But that does come to mind in regards of having a really specific experience that happened that had nothing to do with pizza night. She just
Hmm.
so happened to. She was 11. I don't know, but kids being 11 in school, there's viruses everywhere. You kind of
Yeah.
get sick. And she just so happened to associate one thing after the other, and we eventually did get to a place where not only she was a nourished kid, which was great, um, but also a nourished kid who could eat dairy and pizza. And that
Yep.
was a really cool
Big
moment.
breakthrough. Oh my gosh, when
Exactly.
they finally come full circle.
It was awesome.
I like to say this with a lot of these, and it's really with eating disorders in general. Eating disorders are conspiracy theories in the brain that basically come to the conclusion of the wrong villain.
Fair.
And so the food is thought to be the villain, and when in reality, it is likely the victim of the circumstance. And that's a
Fair.
perfect example where pizza got miscategorized as villain of that arc. And it took years to realize that it wasn't actually the villain, it was the victim. And that is, you see it across pretty much all disordered eating, and the cognitive behavior therapy that we're a part of as a practitioner in a practitioner group really is trying to help them understand the and help discredit their conspiracy theory while also posing the alternative and much more likely theory. And man, is that a process. And
Right.
with ARFID, it's typically some sort of traumatic misassociation, but it becomes so important then to be able to dig into the environment and what's going on. And so, such a tricky one to unpack. And once again, a lot of people, to your point, will start to mistake these, especially if they happened young, as preferences.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
And so it falls under the radar. And so then you go like, well, what if it is just a strong preference? A strong preference won't make you anxious. A strong preference won't leave you trembling when you walk into the facility. A strong preference won't feel like it's absolutely overwhelming in every way. It will just be a preference.
Right, exactly. I gave the example actually earlier today in regards to preferences. If you go to a restaurant and you order something off the menu and you're excited, you're like, oh yeah, that sounds the best. I want to eat that. And then, the waiter or waitress walks away and then they come back to your table and they're like, oh, we're so sorry, but we're actually out. Oh, bummer. I have to go back to the menu and pick something new. I was really looking forward to that, but you pick something new off the menu and you move on. Somebody with RFID walking into a restaurant, or really an eating disorder in general, walking into a restaurant, picking something off the menu that they're like, okay, this is my comfortable thing. If the waiter comes back to the table and says, we're out of this thing, you have to pick something else, I can just picture at least 5 of my kids right now wanting to leave immediately. Like there's no way they're going to be able to sit with the menu and pick something else that they would be somewhat remotely comfortable with. It's just you got to take the L and move on from that experience. So that's exactly the point.
Perfect example. We could spend hours digging into the disordered eating spectrum. I want to pick one more on the spectrum to nudge, and I think it'd be orthorexia if I was going to pick one. And it's, as you heard, obviously those were the two I gave as examples to kind of prime you, but it's because I think that ARFID, because it's association and gets overlooked as preference a lot of the time, or to your point, for young kids just thought of as picky eating or stubbornness. I think that one's cool to understand because I'd want parents and family members and even individuals to be able to look at their own behaviors through this lens and go, is it a preference or am I avoiding something? Orthorexia to me is another one where it's so easy to accidentally commend it in our modern society. And once again, prioritizing eating well is it's not a bad thing. That's not what we're trying to discourage. It's the behind the scenes energy. And so we talk a little bit about orthorexia, what it is, how it shows up. And then I'd love to dig into how it's different from someone that just genuinely prefers to eat better or does it through what we'll call a healthier lens. I'd love to juxtapose that because I think this is the one that there's a lot of confusion across the health population at large. And I think the dietitian lens, because we are so willing to dig into the emotions and the complexity and the nuance, this is something that we end up getting misunderstood on a lot of the time, where our stance is the more neutral stance. But when it's clipped out, it can make it seem like we're saying like, eat everything all the time without regard for self. Like that's that sort of unbiased, or not unbiased, that's that like inappropriately anchored oversimplification of what we're saying. And so let's talk a little bit about orthorexia, because I think a lot of people listening are going to go, oh.
Yes, fair and sure. Yeah. So orthorexia is really the idea. Again, I'll go back to the kind of clean eating comment I made earlier, like I'm going to eat whatever clean means to that any given person. Which
so a self-defined list of rules of what clean means. So we have arbitrary lines in sand. Now, are these arbitrary lines in sand rooted in research and objective metric?
Pretty unlikely. I'll put out there.
Usually they're emotional lines in sand drawn through experience, not actual reality.
Right. So experience is one, influencers is another one. One person says this thing is bad, another person says this thing is bad, but if you really think about this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, what are we left with? That circle of things gets really, really small.
Yep.
And it is interesting because limiting or, eating clean or eating healthy, again, subjectively, whatever that means, is deemed as such a good thing. It's praised in the society
Yeah.
that we live in as discipline, or, oh, I wish I could be like that. Why? Like, don't we, we're supposed to, as humans, enjoy food. Food tastes
Mhm.
good. Every single food that we have access to that is edible is going to nourish our body in some kind of way. So there is a limit to limiting other food, right? There is something to be said for maybe not eating, as an example of the, I'll go with like the one random I can think of in the bad eating community, or pizza, like I was talking about earlier. There's something to be said for not eating pizza 3 meals a day,
Yeah, for sure.
right? But that's one level of the extreme. Never eating pizza ever is another level of the extreme,
Yeah.
right? So I think the world of neutrality, or the whole point of good relationship with food, is to fit somewhere in the middle, like being able to enjoy pizza for sure, but maybe not 3 times a day, right? There's
Yeah.
two extremes there. So I think in the world of orthorexia, the clean eating and the healthy eating is really in the realm of extreme. And I'll come back to an emotional response with food.
Yeah.
Let's say that person is planning their normal lunch and the power goes out and their normal lunch is not accessible. And the office is like, okay, well, we're ordering a pizza for lunch. Great. And if that person is having a huge issue with that thing, or an emotional response, or needing to leave the occasion or the experience, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So I think that's the realm of where orthorexia falls, that there is a line in between, doing something that is benefiting your body, and eating fruits and vegetables and eating proteins and eating all of these foods. There's a line between that and not being able to enjoy anything in the realm of like what they deem as not good or not healthy, which I can go into the worlds
Yeah.
of. That's subjective and doesn't mean a whole lot, but that's a time for, or conversation for another
Yeah.
time.
It's next episode.
Right.
But I love that. And it is that note that orthorexia, what you tend to see is it's at its base, it's a foundation or baseline diet that you'd look at and go, wow, yeah, that's like, there's lots of protein, there's lots of fiber, there's lots of produce, there's typically a nice balance of carbs, fats, and proteins. Like, it's really easy to pass off as, wow, this person just eats healthy. But what you said that I think is so perfect is, when that can't happen, there is a massive fear and anxiety. And that massive fear and anxiety is not founded in reality. You start to see in orthorexia, there's a high neuroticism with it, and there tends to be a big overlap with OCD. And so there's a
Mhm.
resistance to change, or I love your PB&J example, where a person with orthorexia is going to start to have a panic attack about that. And they're just not going to eat it. They're frankly just going to say,
Right.
I just won't eat, which you start to hear, wait, so we're going to go from intentional nourishment to no nourishment, and there's no wiggle room. And so it's this die on the hill, line in the sand, and they just can't reconcile why. It's like, well, what's the PB&J going to do to you? It's like, I just can't eat that. It's just not on my plan. Like, but why? And you have to dig into and you start to, if you can work with someone who's interested, when you help them dig into the why behind the why behind the why, which is the thing behind the thing,
Mhm.
there's some internal narrative of that food is high in calories and makes you fat, or something like that. There's an internal narrative where you go, so what you're saying is, if you ate a peanut butter and jelly for lunch one day instead of your chicken, rice, and broccoli, you're going to become obese? It's like, well, no. And it's like, well, then why are we acting like that? That's where
Right.
we're at. And so you start to see where we're not criticizing the baseline of eating, it's the complete rigidity and inability to sway it all. One of my favorites, and this, is, I think it's such a cool juxtaposition. I think it invites more rigid, more strict eaters to open their mind to this, and this idea of, not everybody is going to go from rigid orthorexic style eating to liberated food openness in a snap of a finger. And I'll say it differently, almost nobody's going to do that. And so I love that the book Wired to Eat by Rob Wolf, and
Mhm.
this example a lot. He's the founder of the paleo diet. And so when people think paleo, most people think like one of the most rigid diets possible. What people don't realize is that he built this, and then it ended up getting taken on by the CrossFit community initially, because it's a highly anti-inflammatory diet. And when you exercise intensely, anti-inflammatory eating is a really helpful way to support exercise load, but then it became this almost like overly neurotic and obsessive restrictive scenario. And
Mhm.
then you end up with the downstream version where a bunch of athletes are eating salads when they should be eating energy, and they're actually missing the point. Now they're eating like they need to lose weight when they need to replenish muscle. So it really aged poorly. But his original diet was that he had irritable bowel disease, and he was trying to figure out a way to eat that would allow him to not have to take and rely on medications. And he was able to keep his intestinal disorder in remission using his paleo diet. It's virtually identical to the FODMAP diet, which is something I find hilarious because dietitians that are anti-paleo are pro-FODMAP, and they're literally the same thing for the same reason. It just got bastardized by media, and now we're in this diet culture talk. But what I love is in his book, Wired to Eat, when he talks about why he eats the way he eats, he has a segment, I'm not going to quote it directly, but a paraphrase of it is, keep in mind that this diet is my baseline. This is what I eat most of the time because I feel great when I eat this way. But if you think I'm missing cake on my daughter's birthday, you're an effing idiot.
Yep, you bring that
That
one up a lot.
I bring it
Yep,
up a
it's
lot,
a
but
good one.
it's
It's a
and
great
again it goes
example.
back to, here's the father of paleo, one of the perceived as most restrictive and most intentional ways to eat. And so
Mhm.
like many orthorexic people eat paleo, but they're not willing to eat cake on their daughter's birthday.
Right.
And that's why I bring that one up, is I think it's one of the most proximate examples to that population where they'd be able to see what we're talking about, which is if the concept of enjoying an exception is so overwhelming to you, we've missed the plot.
Right. That's when, we fall outside of a neutral, healthy relationship with food and we fall somewhere on the disordered eating spectrum. And then we get
Yes.
into like potentially the eating disorder spectrum for some people, not all people. But that's exactly the point, right? If you can't enjoy something, if you can't step outside of the rigidity or the routine, and we can't be
Mhm.
flexible, life is flexible. We have to be flexible in order to survive in some capacity. That is when the red flag happens.
Perfectly said. And I think what I'd want to highlight and almost to cap this disordered eating spectrum is the way I think about it is these disordered eating conditions will compound. We can hear where the orthorexia clean eating list gets smaller and smaller and smaller over time, and then it becomes anorexia a lot
Right.
of the time.
Hmm.
And ARFID, the foods that they're afraid of, get bigger and bigger and bigger, which means the dietary willingness gets smaller and smaller. The food environments get smaller and smaller, and next thing they know, we have anorexia. And so a lot of times these are the starting points of what become clinical eating disorders. And the thing I'd like to say to raise awareness to our listeners is that anorexia kills more people every year than any other psychological illness, including depression.
Hmm.
And that is not a well-known fact. And so when we recognize that anorexia is the leading psychological killer that currently exists in the United States, we shouldn't just be trying to cure anorexia. We should be trying to prevent anorexia. And when we have clients that are on this spectrum, we aren't saying, oh my God, you're in danger now. We are talking to them like they're a pre-diabetic. Hey, let's not develop diabetes. We're trying to get ahead of this. We're trying to nip it in the butt, so to speak. And so the way I like to think about it is we are at Case, we like to think of ourselves as the proactive care group, right? And so dealing with disordered eating is our attempt to be proactive about eating disorders.
No, exactly, right? The whole idea is why wait until somebody is so ill or somebody is all the way down at the end at a need of in a hospital, right? So we're an outpatient group, we're an outpatient dietitian group.
Yeah.
The idea is to do preventative care, and I think that's one of the just a little sidebar. That's one of the main things I love about being an outpatient private practice dietitian. You get to actually impact somebody's quality of life, which to me felt different when I was an inpatient dietitian.
Yeah.
So preventative healthcare is that's a whole again another topic for
Of
another
course.
day.
And
But
yep.
that's exactly the point. Like we want to make sure people are, if they're having any kind of impact to their relationship with food, that's the time. That's the time
Yeah.
that we do something about it. Why wait until that thing impacts their ability to go to a birthday party or impacts their ability to eat at college or impacts their ability to go on a work conference or a work trip. Like, why wait until we get that far? Let's do something about it now.
What this makes me think of is how often we see parents that are in denial. And I think that's the thing I'd want to have you reflect on and share a little bit, but I'll at least just anchor some of my thoughts to it, which is because we're trying to be proactive. So we're saying, hey, this behavior is something that on surface may look like it's a good thing, right? You have this young athlete and their body has changed in a way that we would expect because they started a sport, for example. But you and I, as clinicians, know that the change was way too extreme given the inputs and outputs that were at play. But it's real easy for someone that doesn't know this world, doesn't understand it. It's just like, no, they're a kid going through puberty. They shot up, they lost some weight, they've been really active, and they're really paying attention to their eating because they're really invested in their sport. All the while, the kiddo is slowly but surely becoming more and more fearful of things in the background. And because so many people are overeating and struggling with obesity in our nation, grilled chicken salads are thought of to be super healthy, but they're actually just hypocaloric. And when you have a soccer player running 6 miles, that is not enough food for that body to thrive, let alone grow bones and get taller and all the things. And so one of the things that pops in my head when we talk about the proactive is I almost want to like scream to parents that when a dietitian or clinician is showing concern, we aren't catastrophizing, we are playing chess. We are aware, and we're not just saying, oh, because your child is prioritizing their food that we want them to like eat candy and pizza. That's not what we're saying. We're saying how they are, where it's coming from, this place of fear, this place of apprehension, this misunderstanding. We have a reality here where this is a psychology that is likely to compound and worsen. And it initially may seem like a good thing, but it's not going to age well. And man, is it hard to get parents to accept that and step into that. I know you've been, especially because of how many clients you're currently seeing. Talk to me a little bit about that experience of like what I'm going to call the parent denial of disordered eating. The parent denial of an eating disorder is a whole separate thing, right? Choosing to ignore vomiting and a 76-pound child is negligence to some degree.
Right.
Let's
Different bucket.
let's talk about the parents that are proud of their soccer playing daughter that grew 4 inches, lost 30 pounds in a summer, and has been eating really clean because she's been watching a bunch of videos and they're so proud of her. But meanwhile, you're watching the period stop and all the things that go on. So talk to us a little bit about that as a frame.
Oh yeah, that's a tough bucket to be in. 9 times out of 10, ideally it's 10 out of 10, but 9 times out of 10, parents want the absolute best for their kids, right? They want them to be safe. They want them to be healthy. They want them to have fun. Like kids are kids. We want good things for them. So when that happens, when a kiddo or a teenager is experiencing on the inside, probably some disordered eating and getting to a place of an eating disorder, but on the outside, people aren't noticing that, parents too, and their life is getting fuller, right? Like especially in
Yeah.
the world in which we live in right now, I think we were making some headway in more acceptance of neutral bodies, and then in the past couple maybe months, even a year or two, we've had some setbacks there. But so when things are changing on the outside, and that soccer player did lose 30 pounds, and they're like, man, I'm eating, XYZ thing, and their life gets fuller, and you're noticing your kid be more comfortable or more confident and walk around and experience things and feel more comfortable in their clothing. Like you want those things for your kid, and that's great. Nobody is taking that away. We want
Yeah.
your kid to be comfortable and confident and enjoy their life, right? We want them to do that on the inside too, right? If they're only able to do that, if they're restricting their bodies, or they're only able to do that if they're feeling terrified about the actual, they're going to the birthday party and they're so excited to be invited to the birthday party and then they can't eat at the birthday party, that is a red flag. That's a problem. So I think that, again, most of the time parents want the absolute best for their kids, but we got to think about how that sets them up for the future too, right? You want the best for your kid when they're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, but what about when they're 25, 30, right? I have a lot of
Yeah.
conversations. I tend to think about a lot of the dads I have conversations with
Mm.
of the teen girl, and I'm like, we have a lot of conversation of bone density and their period stopping and what that may or may not mean for their future if they're, when they're not 15, but when they're
Yeah.
25 and 27 and 30 and et cetera, and what they want to do with their life and their bodies at that time. And I can always think about, there's this one dad that I think about every time, and he's like, what do you mean this might impact my kid's ability to have kids when she's older? I'm like, yes, like we need to be eating. We need to be eating enough. And even if that doesn't feel important right now, there is a whole life ahead. right? Like we have to prepare and plan for your life when you're 30 and 45 and 60, right? Bone density is a huge thing when kids are kids. We have to build bone density.
Especially in girls.
Exactly. We have the opportunity to do that when we're kids and teens and young adults. We don't have the opportunity to do that when we're 30 and 40 and 50. It looks different. The landscape
Yeah.
looks different. So to parents, you want the best for your kid. Great. We want the best for your kid now and later. And that might mean challenging them to do things that are really uncomfy, which is hard when
Oh my
your kid
gosh, yes.
has anxiety or has some kind of response to, okay, the grilled chicken salad example, we're adding toast, we're adding rice, and they have this huge reaction to, and sometimes parents don't want to ruffle feathers. And I get that because it's really hard. But if we don't do that now, it's going to get worse later.
Yeah.
So I think there's, something to be said for that too.
Beautifully said. That is one of the most difficult aspects of proactive care, is that our role as a dietitian, I always say, is to play chess when everyone else is playing checkers. But we are thinking ahead. When we talk about health, we're talking about sustainability of health. And what's so tricky is if you have someone, you gave a perfect example of a child that is doing things that are causing short-term thriving, and you don't have a robust understanding. What ends up happening is, as you as a clinician may be seeing that the short-term thriving is an expected outcome of the behaviors, but the behaviors are progressing and compounding in a way that's going to sail right past. And a lot of times that's what a disordered eating or eating disorder reality is it's behaviors that had good intentions and just aged poorly. They started off as becoming more aware of food and then became obsessive and then afraid. And so a lot of times the eating disorder has what we like to call a genuine intention, but that intention aged poorly. And what I'd say out loud is, as dietitians, I think that's one of the most challenging and also misunderstood aspects of our clinical expertise. Is when I'm talking or you're talking to a patient, we're not just talking to them right now, we're talking about the future them. And so I'll give you the polarizing examples for the audience to hear what we're saying. You have an eating disorder client that, like you said, they're getting some of the short-term benefits, and then you see the pathology underneath those, so you know that it's going to lead to low bone mineral density, and it's going to lead to social isolation, and it's going to lead to micronutrient imbalances and cessation of menses and all of these things downstream. And you go, a child of, female, their bones get denser until they're 20, and then it's locked in, and that's your bone density for life. And your body starts to break that down over time. And so that's the difference between osteoporosis at 45 versus 65 versus 85. And like, you have to be the one that has that information. And somehow you have to convince a 13-year-old girl to care about 65-year-old her. And you have to convince 45-year-old dad to think about that too. And that is such an impossible frame of reference, and understandably so. But we are sitting here nonetheless as preventive practitioners screaming about it. The opposite is true. And I'm going to say it in the wake of all of the GLP-1s. So when we think about the weight loss side of things, where we are trying to help people become the healthier them, not the lighter them.
Right. Big difference.
And that's where many people in America, if they optimize their health, they will end up lighter in some way, just because a lot of people are carrying extra weight. But that is not to say that they are one and the same. And so what ends up happening is you get what's happening now. People are taking these meds at max dosages to make scale go down as fast as possible. And while the scale's going down, which is the outcome they have mentally correlated with health, unfortunately. And again, is there some 0.7 correlation coefficient? Sure, but it's not a 1-to-1. So they see, oh, look, scale go down, I'm getting healthier. And the acute weight loss causes lipids to get better, and it causes blood pressure to get better. So all these short-term things happen, but we know that they're not doing it because their lifestyle's changing. They're doing it because they're taking a max dose of a med and selectively starving. And that med has a 3-year lifespan before it stops working. And they're going to end up with low bone density, low muscle mass. They're going to have no habits to support it. And now they're going to have slow metabolism because they've been starving themselves. And they're going to regain the weight disproportionate to visceral regions with now less muscle and less dense bones. And so when I'm talking to somebody on GLP-1s, I'm not talking to right now them. I'm talking to 5 years from now them, 10 years from now them. And when the scale go down, it's real hard for them to think about that. That is the checkers in the game of chess. They're so busy saying, "King me, bitch," that they don't realize that they're not even playing the right game. And so soapbox and rant over to some degree, but eating disorder spectrum is that same thing. I think as clinicians, our job is to keep current you and future you prioritized and sustainably in mind in your best interest. And sometimes short-term data does not actually correlate to long-term outcome.
True.
And so our second segment is the ingredient obsession. And so on the episode, we always try and look at what people are talking about, what's the ingredient. And with the ED and disordered eating lens in mind, this one felt really obvious. And so I'm gonna be your patient for a second.
Bring it.
Sugar's bad for me.
Why?
Well, it's just bad. It causes inflammation. It makes people sick. It's the reason why everybody's so fat.
Okay, patient Andrew.
Patient Andrew goes hard.
Yeah, I take it. Hey, listen, honestly, that makes my job the most fun, right? Like to be fired up, to be interesting, to ask questions, to poke holes. Like I think that's a big part of diet culture, right? To be able to poke holes in it. So for sugar, typically the conversation I have in this realm is let's take a step back, right? Food is an umbrella term. Every single edible thing that you have access to is food, right? Like we hope we're eating edible things. If we're not, that's ironically a different eating disorder, known as pica. But
Yep.
Anyway,
I digress.
Right, exactly. So food being an umbrella term, food can break down into 3 main macronutrients. Those are like our big essential nutrients that we have in a day: proteins, fats, and carbs. That's it. Anything edible that we are consuming is either a protein and or a fat and or a carb. Literally anything, right? So in the conversation I have when somebody says sugar is bad, well, let's break that down. Is sugar a protein? Probably not. Is sugar a fat? Probably not. Sugar is a carb. Okay, so you have something that has sugar in it, and that becomes a carbohydrate in your body. I place the sugar, whatever we're talking about. Let's say we're talking about a cookie. Okay, so we take the sugar out of the cookie and place it on the table. Then I take 2 other carbs. I take a blueberry and I place it on the table. Then I take a piece of toast and I place it on the table. We're looking at 3 carbs. All 3 of those things taste different in your mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taste receptors are different, especially as we learned about you, super taster. Yep. They're going to taste different in your mouth.
People are really getting to know me on this podcast. Yeah,
I think it's a good thing.
For better or worse.
It's happening, so we're rolling with
it.
So all of those things are going to taste different. They all have a different kind of like role in eating too, right?
I love that. That right there. I want to slow it down just because, they have a different role. Go.
Exactly.
Play.
Okay. Exactly. So I wouldn't necessarily say like, so we're using a cookie, we're using a blueberry, we're using a piece of toast. So I wouldn't necessarily say that for my birthday, I want a piece of toast, and putting a candle in a piece of toast for me does not work out for my birthday,
really
right?
Sad.
That sounds really sad.
That makes me real sad.
It does. It's really, really not a good time. So we use that as the example, right? All of those foods are doing something different, or I often have the example of like, lasagna. I use that a lot. Putting blueberries as your noodles in the lasagna is really bizarre. You want to use noodles in your lasagna, right?
Yeah.
So
a carb is not a carb in some ways.
True. So they all taste a little different. They all do something a little different in regards to, how they're used in your day to day. But at base, sugar from a cookie, a blueberry, and a piece of toast all have carbs. So when you eat carbohydrates, again, they're going to taste different in your mouth. They're going to go down your digestive system. So they're going through your esophagus, they're hitting your stomach, acid is released. Once that happens, the food that you consumed is no longer the recognizable food in your stomach, right? By the time the blueberry leaves your stomach and goes to your small intestine, it's no longer a blueberry. If it is, that is a problem.
Yeah.
Right? That blueberry
It's
breaks
called
down.
malabsorption, and
Exactly.
you should seek medical help
Correct.
quickly.
Yes, please call us if that's happening to you. So by the time it leaves your stomach, it's no longer a blueberry, it's a carb. So carbs from toast, carbs from blueberries, carbs from cookies come through your intestine or come through your digestive system, hit your stomach, acids released, now they're carbs. By the time it hits your small intestine, a carb is a carb is a carb. There's no world in which a blueberry is entering your mouth and then ending up in your brain to give you energy, right? Again, problem. Carbohydrates are what's being transported in your body. So by the time carbs enter your brain, right, your brain's preferred energy source is a carbohydrate. So sugar is bad, but sugar is also fueling your entire body.
Your brain runs on glucose.
Literally, exactly.
That is its preference, and it is what it uses.
Exactly. So by the time that carbohydrate enters your brain, it's a carb. Your brain can't decide, I only want carbohydrates from toast. Your brain doesn't get to make that choice. It just needs carbs.
Give me glucose.
Exactly. So the conversation I end up having with people a lot is every single piece of edible food that you consume is breaking down into those three main macronutrients. Your digestive process is working, hopefully. Your digestive process is working. So by that time the food is broken down, it's no longer the food that you consume. It's now its building block. On the inside of
Beautifully
your
said.
body, a carb is a carb is a carb. It doesn't matter where it's coming from.
Facts.
Yeah. Mic drop.
Mic drop moment. We take those.
Yes.
It's so funny when you start to see where, again, in the disordered eating or in these like overly rigid rules, it's something that becomes oversimplified that was probably rooted. Again, they saw a trend and came to the wrong conclusion, right? So sugar is bad is a really good example of noticed a trend and came to the wrong conclusion. But it also it's a linguistic issue because when people say sugar is bad, they don't mean sugar. They mean the foods that they associate with that term.
Right.
And that's what gets so tricky is you said it beautifully. Well, sugar is like the most simple broken down version of a carbohydrate that our body, it goes through our bloodstream as a superhighway to deliver deliver nutrients and energy to all of us. So like we need sugar. Now there's different ways we receive said sugar, but it really, for most people's actual, what they're stating is the observation that excessive sugar has negative effects.
Fair.
And
I'm not going to negate that.
And that's what's funny is, but they're mistaking a hypercaloric problem, a problem of someone consuming way more energy than their body needs or can use, and the inflammatory processes that go downstream from that as sugar is the problem. And it's, well, sugar was one of the ingredients in the overconsumption, but the sugar wasn't necessarily the problem. And then even if we're going to give benefit of the doubt, yes, foods that are higher in just raw added sugar are less filling, which means they're easier to overconsume, but the overconsumption is still the problem. And so if you can consume any carbohydrate in appropriate quantity, we're good.
Right. And that goes for literally anything,
Yeah.
right? Like there is such a thing as too much, but what that means, very subjective, right?
Yeah.
There is definitely in those three examples such a thing as too much, too many cookies for sure.
Beautifully said.
There's
Yes.
also such a thing as too many blueberries.
Facts.
Right?
Didn't you see
Like-
Willy Wonka?
Yeah. Thank you. Love that example. Love that example. Exactly.
Science.
The best kind of science. But there's such a thing as too many for sure. Exactly.
Yeah.
But it doesn't automatically mean that having one of something or having some of something sometimes is the wrong thing or the bad thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
To demonize something at the ingredient level like that, sugar is bad, is to just fundamentally misunderstand the term sugar.
Right.
And yes, it can be a part of very good processes and also detrimental or deleterious processes. But to cut it at sugar is just it's oversimplified, and it's oversimplified in a way that becomes dangerous. And if you actually have robust understanding of what we're talking about, you start to realize that, oh, it's rooted in just lack of understanding.
Right.
And
Exactly.
man, is that running rampant right now. So I love your mic drop of helping people understand sugar and carbohydrates, because I think that's the thing is there's even the carbs are bad concept, right? Well, the concept of carbs are bad. Do we really think that people are talking about sweet potatoes and blueberries and arugula? Because all of those are dominantly carbohydrate if you look at their distribution of energy.
Right.
But no, they're referring to hyper palatable, easily digestible carbohydrates that are overconsumed or eaten in a way that is not appropriate. So their relationship with it is inappropriate. They have a propensity to overeat it, right? And so
Right.
we can hear where to blame a macronutrient is to misunderstand how that macronutrient fits into the grand scheme of things.
Mhm.
And they're zoomed into the wrong floor of the cascade. And what that ends up doing is it creates fear over things that don't actually make sense.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
When you think about like building a meal, the ideal to build a meal, right? We have a protein, we have a carb, we have a fat, we preferably have a produce. If you're eating a meal that exclusively has carbohydrates in it, A, that's not a meal. That's a pile of carbohydrates. B, you're going to need to eat a significant amount of that in order to feel full, right? So when we balance it out and add in all of the other things, how is the carbohydrate the bad thing of that meal? It's one of the 4 essential pieces of it.
Beautifully said. All of a sudden, the carb is no longer the villain. It was the victim. And I'll say it differently. It's actually your ally if you know how to utilize it.
Yes.
I,
Some
I
high level
I did
stuff.
this years ago as the villain victim ally triad. It was some, me and my nerdism posts that I go down rabbit hole. That was one on Instagram years ago that I did for
Have to
sure.
dig that one out.
Yeah, we'll have to find it and repurpose it. Every once in a while I throw something at the wall and it sticks.
Hey, if it sticks, it sticks.
Oh, I love it. Thank you for that. And so sugar is definitely something that we should be more open-minded to. And I'll put words in your mouth. Maybe we should be looking more at how we're utilizing it and how we're pairing it and how we're eating it rather than that we're eating it.
Right. Yep.
How instead of what? Welcome to Dietetics. Okay, our next one is going to be our social media react. And what was fun is what I've enjoyed about the new podcast setup is the social media react used to be Devin trying to trigger me. She would try and find something just absurd for me to react to and was hoping that I'd get real punchy and cheeky and sarcastic. Nice. And now I get to do that for our dietitian team.
Rand, so thanks, Dev.
It's the best promotion that I ever thought. I never knew I needed. And so what I do now is it's an excuse to, before our episode, kind of scroll Instagram in the diety world and see what trends are going on. And then I'll save a couple of them and be like, ooh, which one? And so as I was scrolling for you through the lens of eating disorder and disordered eating, I didn't come across a trend. I actually just realized that the trend is social media at this point. As I was scrolling, it was just fasting and biohacking and all sorts of restriction. And then it was also feasting and refeeding and reverse metabolics. And then it was just food porn. But then it was food porn with a protein twist and food porn with a fiber hack. And I got to the point where I was just scrolling and I went, no wonder people are so confused and hyper opinionated and almost like tribal about their food opinions and drawing lines in the sand that to someone like you or me that's like lived and made a career of this just seems so arbitrary. And at times I'll use the word stupid, unfortunately. And I don't mean that person is, I mean their comprehension of what they're talking about is, but it's to say, I want to take a moment and say fasting, feasting, and food porn is the social media reaction.
Fair.
And with that in mind, I started thinking about, I don't think people really understand what food is or what it's meant for anymore. And I also personally go, people struggle so much with the core concept of hunger and fullness. Like when I think of the fasting and the feasting, that's an example of two extremes of a core concept, which is body request energy, person access and get energy, nourish body with energy, body feel satisfied, say thank you for energy, human use energy to go do thing. Like we've lost the plot. So talk to me about like hunger and fullness and satiety. Like, should I be stuffed at every meal? Should I be blood sugar trembling and shaking before every meal?
Right.
Where are we on this spectrum?
I think you nailed it or really hit the nail on the head. It is so confusing, right? Something that I know you say often is there's so much what is the exact statement? There's like so much information at our fingertips it becomes dangerous or something similar to that.
We have the
right?
opportunity. It's the Dunning-Kruger. We know just enough to be dangerous because there's so much information at our fingertips.
Exactly, which is a really cool thing. We have access to so much information out there, but at some point, like that becomes incredibly overwhelming. Like, how do we narrow it down?
It's fun because you start to realize intellect is your ability to process information. And then knowledge is the accumulated processing of information. And so we are humans, which means we have intellect, and social media and, as allowed people with potentially higher intellect tendencies, aka higher processing speeds, their computer runs a little faster, to get access to information and then also speak out that information. But it doesn't necessarily force them to have accumulated enough information to genuinely be knowledgeable. And that's what Dunning-Kruger is. It's this phenomenon where someone with high intellectual capacity starts to process info. They process it a little bit faster than the typical human, but then as a result, their confidence in their intellect gets misappropriated as confidence in their knowledge. And so they then have an attitude of extreme knowledge when it's really intellect. And if they don't understand the topic in depth, they're actually arrogantly misinformed. And so what's interesting is you see this phenomenon now where people will they'll go attend a weekend seminar about something, and then you'll ask them their confidence in their knowledge on the topic, and they'll rate themselves as an 8 or 9 out of 10. And then you have someone like you or me that have spent a decade studying, immersing, engaging, really living in a topic, and you ask us our knowledge, and we'll rate ourselves as an 8 or 9 at best. We might even say a 7.
Yeah, I think we'd be a little bit modest about it.
Correct. And so that's the modesty is the result of mastery, but it's also the idea that the more you know, the more you don't know. It's the phenomenon of like, oh, you start to realize how big a topic is. And so there's this tendency, you scratch the surface and you get overly confident in it, essentially. We've got a little dog sniffing. She woke up from her nap. So Dunning-Kruger aside,
right.
Let's come full circle for a moment and let's talk about this hunger and fullness spectrum.
Right.
Sorry to fractal us.
No, that was
I'm known for a good fractal.
Hey, listen, that's a value add, so we'll take it. Hunger and fullness, I think, is really, really interesting. And I get that question, honestly, a lot, especially, do I have to be full? Should I be full more than once a day? People are mind blown when the answer to that question is yes, right? Like you think about it, you have 24 hours in any given day to be a whole person. You have 24 hours to sleep. You have 24 hours to sleep and rest, to hydrate, to eat, to shower, hopefully, and have good hygiene and go to work and have relationships and do all these things, right? In that period of time, roughly half you're awake. So in a 12-ish, right? Everyone's different, but in a 12-ish, I think you and I are both on the realm of we don't get enough sleep, but in the 12-ish hours that we're awake, we have that amount of time to fuel a body for 24 hours. So in that period of time, if you only get full once, that's kind of a problem, right? You're only getting full one time a day. And the reality of that is then your body is missing nutrition from the rest of the day, and there's no other time to make it up because you're asleep, right? Yeah. So I really love, we have a little icon or a little graphic. I think Laura actually made it, the hunger fullness pendulum that we have. I love it. In that, it really explains the difference between what hunger feels like in a body and what fullness feels like in a body. And it's kind of shown on this spectrum, so to speak. And one of the analogies I really love to use is at the amusement park. Have you ever been on one of those like pirate ship rides?
Yes, I was just thinking of the pirate ship back and forth.
I freaking hate those things because when you get on there, and this is the exact analogy I love to use, you get on there and it starts and you're like, oh, okay, you're just kind of casually rocking back and forth, right? Everything's fine.
4, 6, 4, 6.
Exactly.
3, 7, 3, 7.
And then it starts picking up. And you feel, I don't know about you, but I feel like my life is flashing before my eyes. I'm going to fall out of this boat. Like, how is this thing still a ride that kids are allowed on? Is beyond me. Not a roller coaster gal. But the boat starts swinging in these massive directions, and you don't feel comfortable or safe, or I think that's part of the thrill of a roller coaster. But in your day-to-day life, we don't want to feel like we're on a roller coaster all the time. Yeah. So when you think about the exact numbers that you were just using on the hunger fullness pendulum, you want a casual rock, a casual cradle, not like a holy smokes, I'm going to fall out of the boat at any given time.
Yeah.
So in regards to hunger and fullness, we want the body to feel hungry. That's a normal human experience. Feeling hungry is normal. What we do with that hunger is the big thing though, right? Like feeling hungry and then eating food and feeling full, that's the intention. Feeling hungry and running with it, that's when we get into the disordered eating and eating disorder spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Feeling hungry is normal. People feel that in a different way. Sometimes we feel that in our belly. Sometimes we feel it in our brain. We get, sleepy, or it's harder to concentrate or think. If you're getting to the place where you are shaky or your blood sugar is dropping or you're nauseous or you feel like you're going to pass out, we have gone too far. You are at the point of that amusement park ride that you're about to fall off the ship. Yeah, that's a problem. We want to avoid that. But the intention when you eat food is you get to the other comfortable side of the spectrum, which is fullness. Yeah. Fullness in a body is also normal, something we want to experience when we're eating meals throughout the course of the day. We want to feel full. We want to feel comfortable. We want to feel satiated. I love that word, satiation. Yeah. You want to feel all of those things when you're eating enough food. because that fullness, that level of satisfaction is going to carry you through to the next meal. If you're hungry and you eat just enough to feel neutral, you're going to get hungry sooner, right?
Yeah.
You kind of go from this, if we think about, if I'm thinking about all the numbers that associated with it, the numbers 3, or the number 3 comes to mind when we think about hunger. Out of 0 to 10, 0 being you're so hungry, 10 being you're so full,
Yeah.
level of bingefulness, right? That level 3 hunger, which if you're looking for that graphic, we could probably post that if we're
Yeah.
comfortable
We
with
can
it.
definitely do that.
But that 3 level hunger is reasonable amount of hunger, right? 2, 3, 4. That's
Hmm.
reasonable amount of hunger. If we eat enough food to get to 5, which is like the bare minimal, that is the ship is not moving yet.
Yeah.
We feel neutral. That is not enough to carry us a few hours,
Yeah.
right?
It's not satisfied.
Exactly. Neutrality and satisfaction are different. So
Mm.
the intention when we feel hungry is to go from that 3 to that level 7, that full, that satisfied, that satiated, that comfortable, that slight distension in our bellies too, which I think
Contented. And then
exactly.
there's a physical and a mental awareness of it.
Right. And that's a normal feeling. People tend to get really, really nervous when we get to when I use the word distended, people go, "Oh my goodness
Oh,
gracious, like that's bad." No, that's normal. Like you're putting food into your body. It has to go somewhere. Your
yeah.
intestines are going to swell just slightly, right? We're not getting so full to the point where we need to take our pants off in the bathroom, or we need to change our clothes on the way
Yeah.
out of somewhere, right?
The button pops off because we're
Exactly.
so distended.
Right.
No.
That's a different
Yep.
conversation. But getting to the place of fullness and satisfaction at breakfast, that's what gives you enough energy and enough, really frankly, nutrition and food to get you through to lunch or a morning snack, depending on how your schedule operates, depending on what your nutrition needs for. Getting not full enough or getting just to that neutral aspect, we're going to get hungry so much more often. We're going to be thinking about food so much more often,
Yeah.
because that's another sign of hunger. But if we eat enough to feel full and satiated, that's when that casual rock kind of takes place on a day-to-day basis. That's what we're aiming for.
I love that visual. It also, one of the things that always surprised me is how few people actually have felt or understand what satiated feels like. And it's because in our society we have a tendency to just like sail right past it to 10.
Right.
And in an attempt to avoid a 10, a lot of people that are suffering and struggling with eating disorders will just never go past a 5, to your point. And if they're really in a clinically deep state of an eating disorder, they actually pride themselves on their hunger, which means they won't go past a 3.
Right.
And so the spectrum is such a useful tool to help people understand what we're trying to get to. And one of the things I love to say, and you know this, you've heard me say this more times than you probably care to, is that unfortunately the 0 causes the 10.
Every time.
And so when we think about this, let's like zoom out for a second and go, what are we actually trying to do here? We are trying to eat. Okay, what is food? Food is fuel. So we're trying to fuel you. So we are trying to nourish the body so that it can do its day-to-day things, which means a nice steady drip of fuel would be a really good thing. The absence of fuel means that your body is going to be powering down. So going to a 0 and being hungry means that your brain and body are just fundamentally underperforming. And then going to a 10, which is to be stuffed beyond need, is going to overburden your digestive tract and mean that your body has to reroute a whole bunch of blood and all sorts of attention to the stomach, which is also going to make you sleepy and not clear. And so we go, if our goal is to stay energized, right, then we shouldn't be touching a 0 or a 10. The
Nope.
comment being that you rarely go to a 10 unless you're at a 0. Volatility is real. If you restrict and create a massive amount of over hunger, your brain will encourage you to overcompensate and it will create over fullness. And that was necessary during a time when food abundance didn't exist, because you might not know if you were going to eat for the next few days. So in an opportunity to eat, if you don't eat for 2 days and then you're given an opportunity, your brain is going to eat for today and for tomorrow and for the next day. It is basically just a like resource guarding mechanism.
Mhm.
We now are fortunate that we live in a place of food abundance, which means we don't typically find ourselves going multiple days without access to food, which means we don't typically encounter the 0, but we also don't need the benefit of the stomach's ability to create the 10. So that 4 to 7 of, yes, we want you to feel a little hungry and a little full. And one of the things I love to note is, especially when you talk about satisfaction and being satiated, the 5 is something that tends to happen to people a lot that work like really, really intense mentally stimulating jobs where they just snack all day.
The
The
consistent graze, right.
And it goes back to what I was saying is in an effort to have stable energy, they're basically like essentially eating a Cliff Bar on a hike, something that digests easily enough that you don't have to stop and digest it, but isn't so fast to digest like a Gatorade that it completely spikes you and crashes you. So they end up grazing and snacking on Cliff Bar-esque type foods. People crave carbohydrates mostly because they're the easiest to digest. They keep the blood sugar stable. But grazing creates the absence of hunger and the absence of fullness.
Right.
And so as a result, you start to crave satiety and it leads to overeating a lot of the time. And so that's where trying to just sit at the 5 all the time is not the answer. You need to have a little wiggle. We need to feel a little hungry and a little satisfied. And it's neat because if you anchor someone, I've found, at what a graze feeling is, of that like absence of hunger without presence of fullness, the I could eat is what I call it.
Right.
If you anchor, because most people have been that, they know what that is. The I could eat. It's like, cool. We are just like 2 notches past that to the I feel good.
Yeah, I don't want more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could I eat more? Yes. But I'm at a point where if I did, I'd feel too full. And a lot of times it's this fun process of, depending on who you're talking to, helping them touch 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A lot of times you need to know what a 10 is, to be honest, because it sets the precedent. That doesn't mean we intentionally try and touch it, but a lot of people will overcorrect before they find what the sweet spot is. But it's so fun to explore that spectrum. And then when you have that person that finally goes, I actually found the sweet spot where I ate a meal, felt satisfied, no longer felt as prompted to eat, but my brain would have just finished the plate because that's what I do. And then afterwards, I felt so good.
Yeah.
I had a client that did it at a Pirates game this summer.
Cool.
And they were like, I had a burger and fries. And normally I would just eat all the fries because they were there. And then I would sit there in my chair, half asleep, feeling sick because I ate a bucket of French fries. Or like I ate the burger and I had some fries. And then I realized like I was kind of done. And I then set the food under my little chair and I got to enjoy the game.
That's awesome.
And it was like this aha moment where we explored why he would finish the fries. And part of it was, well, I paid for it. And it's like, you paid to feel full. You didn't pay to feel sick and sleepy.
Right.
You paid to feel full during a baseball game. And so like they gave you too much food. It's your job to find that sweet spot. Right. And so these are those moments where that pendulum is so valuable. So I really am happy you brought that up.
Yeah, I think it's a really good one. Right. It's solid. I use the example too of the like kind of a light dimmer. If you ever had that growing up, we had, as I got older, we had in my kitchen like the ability to dim the kitchen light instead of turn it on and off, which is a very cool feature. Love it. My dad, though, did not love that we would play with the dimmer instead of turning the light on and off because the electric bill kept going up. Right. So when you think about hunger fullness, I think about the idea of using the light switch on and off. You get hungry, the light switch is on, you eat food, you feel full, the light switch goes off and you move on throughout the day, right?
Yeah.
If you have the light dimmer and you play with the dim up and down, you don't fully turn the light on, you don't fully turn the light off. 1, it's never bright enough in the room to do what you're doing. And 2, your electric bill's through the roof. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. The idea of feeling hungry, eating food, feeling full and satisfied, turning the light on, turning the light off, moving on, your electric bill goes down, you can see what you're doing and you move on. So I like that analogy.
Yeah,
too.
that's a great visual. Anything to help people interact with it so they can start to troubleshoot it and find it themselves. Because that's such a cool thing. It's one of my favorite parts of what we do.
Yeah,
so
same.
I love it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Case Specific Podcast. This is just part 1 of Andrew's conversation with eating disorder dietitian Danielle Marzella. Stay tuned for part 2. Follow us on social media at Case Specific Nutrition. Subscribe to the podcast, leave us a 5-star review, and let us know down below what topics you want us to cover next.